All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So before we get started, Third Place Books would like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded ancestral land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the Duwamish people and the land itself. So welcome to our virtual event space. My name is Allie. I'm a bookseller at the Lake Forest Park location, and I'm your host for this evening. And I am so excited to be introducing Ilsa Govan and Tillman Smith, as well as their guests here to discuss their book, What's Up with White Women. But before we get into the good stuff, on behalf of all of us here at Third Place Books, I just want to quickly thank you all so much for tuning in. For those of you who may not know, we are an independent bookstore with 3 locations in the Seattle area. And as much as we miss having these events in our bookstores, it has been such a delight to expand this online program to connect readers and authors in a virtual space. So thank you all so much for tuning in and buying books. Your support is what makes all of this possible. For those of you in the Seattle area, come on in. All 3 of our locations are open, or you can place an order online and come pick them up in store. Or if you're not local, we do, of course, ship. So if you haven't gotten your hands on a copy of the book and you would like to, go ahead and follow the link I will post very shortly. Proceeds from sales of What's Up with White Women will go to the Unspoken Truths and Suru for Solidarity. So while you're over on our website, I definitely encourage you to check out some of our other upcoming events. We have an exciting roster coming up in the next few months. Tomorrow, there's an event with Glory Edom, founder of the book club and digital platform Well Read Black Girl, for the release of her anthology on girlhood. And she's in conversation with Edwidge Danticat. So if that's something you're interested in, go ahead and check out that event and so many others over on our website. And of course, if you would like to stay in touch with our community, you can sign up for our newsletter. It's a weekly update about events and exciting releases, our online book clubs, and of course, follow us on any of the major social media platforms. We are at Third Place Books for the quickest updates and recommendations. Speaking of social media, if you would like to check out some of our other past virtual events, you can find most of them on our YouTube channel, including this event within the next couple days. So if you'd like to see some of our other virtual events or share this one, go ahead and track us down over there. This evening, we will be here for about an hour, and towards the end, we will be taking questions. So if you have any questions, which we very much hope that you do, go ahead and leave those in the Q&A box, which should be either at the top or bottom of your screen. So before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone of our commitment to ensuring the safety and well-being of event attendees and guest authors. So in our question spaces, please do lead with kindness and refrain from any inappropriate behavior or harassment. There are auto-generated closed captions available from the menu at the top or bottom of the screen. Select the live transcript button to enable or disable them. And finally, should any technical issues arise, which, age of Zoom, it could happen, we will work as quickly as we can to resolve them, and we appreciate your patience and understanding. And with that, I think that's all of my housekeeping. So without further ado, I am so thrilled to introduce our authors. First, Ilsa Govan, the co-founder of Cultures Connecting, who has led conversations about racial equity and at workshops and conferences across the country. She also volunteers to co-coordinate the White Caucus at the annual National White Privilege Conference. Prior to Cultures Connecting, she worked as an equity and race specialist for the Seattle Public Schools, where she was tasked with addressing institutional racism at a large organization. The second author joining us tonight is Tillman Smith, who has been an educator and project manager for over 35 years, serving as a teacher, administrator, college instructor, caucus facilitator, trainer, and coach. She has facilitated workshops throughout the country on the topics of racial justice, white privilege, internalized sexism, and internalized white supremacy. Currently, she partners with government, educational, and nonprofit agencies as a race-based caucus organizer, facilitator, trainer, and executive coach. Their book, What's Up with White Women, is a guide for white women to strengthen their anti-racism practices, blending real-life stories, theory, and anti-racism practices from decades of on-the-ground work. The authors invite white women to understand their gendered role in systematic racism and their unique opportunity for action. So thank you all so very much for being here. I am so excited to listen in on this conversation. If you need anything, of course, give me a shout. I will be listening. And with that, I'm going to pass the stage to our authors and their guests. So welcome, everybody.
Thanks so much, Allie. As she said, I'm Ilsa. My pronouns are she and her. It's really great to be here with all of you. Tillman and I actually had this idea that we would sit in a bookstore and have a line of people signing books. Not going to happen. I might go into third place Seward Park tomorrow and sign a bunch of books. And if you're there, you could stand in line to get one. It is my local bookstore. I really do appreciate your invitation to be here. I have a long relationship with Third Place Books and love what y'all are doing in our community. So this book, What's Up with White Women, which I actually have some spots bookmarked tonight in it, came from, well, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself because it leads into this book. I grew up in a feminist family and a white family. We did not have conversations about whiteness, but I knew my whole life about what it, some of analysis of living in a patriarchal society. And then later on in life, I found out about my whiteness, about my white privilege, and I wanted to do something about that. But I really disregarded the intersection of sexism and how my gendered experience was influencing the way that my white privilege was showing up. And it wasn't until Tillman Smith invited me and another friend of ours, MG, to get together to start to explore these ideas that I really started looking at those identities as being, as intersecting with one another and being inextricably linked with one another. In fact, much of the privilege that we get as white women and people socialized into female gender norms comes from our relationship to white men. And so Tillman and MG and I actually created this model of identity development. We looked at white women's position in between white men and people of color. And we've been doing workshops on this in the Seattle community for years. And then we're so excited to have this book published. And so the heart of our book, what gives our book life and true meaning, and what has taught me so much about this, is listening to the stories of our focus group members. And I think that once you pick up the book and you start reading it, you'll just see the way that the focus group members bring this book to life. And so we are just so delighted that 4 of the focus group members who we got to be in conversation with are able to be in conversation with us again tonight. And so would love for you all to introduce yourselves.
Hi everybody. I'm Terry, and how can I introduce myself tonight? I use she, her pronouns. I'm a mom of a white male adult now. I have spent a lot of my working life working in early learning in various roles and also as a domestic violence advocate. So I really feel strongly that I can identify as an advocate for families and children. The other thing that I'm going to share tonight is that, I grew up and went to school before Title IX, and that's going to show up in the little excerpt that I'm going to share with everyone tonight. Great to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joanna Eager, and I use she, her pronouns, and I identify as a queer, cis, white woman. I run my own consulting business, Joanna Eager Consulting, and I provide DEI trainings on a number of topics, as well as I facilitate groups that provide the opportunity for white people to explore and identify the impact of our whiteness in community. And I am a former educator, K-12 educator, However, I like to say I am always an educator, as I've always had my foot in doing this type of work within the context of K-12 education. So special shout out to educators and teachers tonight.
My name is Katie, and I use she, her pronouns. I am a Northwest native, cisgender, straight, middle-class white mom and sister and daughter, and I'm also a feminist therapist here in Seattle.
I'm Mallory Clark, and I was a teacher for over 30 years, most recently in Seattle Public Schools, teaching reading at the high school level. And I guess most recently, the work I've done in the community is mutual aid work during the pandemic. I am a mother of an adult daughter, and I'm a wildlife tracker. Love being outdoors.
Welcome everybody. I am so happy to be here with you. My name is Tillman Smith. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the co-author of this book and the collaborator with these amazing women whose stories constantly illustrate what it was that we were trying to explain and share in our book. Before we start, we're going to give most of the evening over to each one of these women so they can share their stories with you. What I want you to think about as you hear their stories is where they are developmentally, and if they use phrases like I'm telling a story from projection, or I'm telling a story from immersion, something like that, please know that those are names from the different parts of the model. And so what we hope these stories will do is excite you and get you wanting to read this book, not because it's important that everybody buy the book, though that would be great. The point of this is that we expand this conversation and that we have as many white women and people that live with us as white women trying to figure out this question, what's up with us? So with that, Terry, may I ask you to start us off?
I'm happy to start off. When I received this copy of this book, I didn't know what to expect. And the excerpt that I'm going to read tonight is one that I least expected, the story that I least expected to be included in this dialogue. But because it's a developmental model of sorts, because it's a developmental model, it makes a lot of sense because it's a story from my childhood, and you should know this about me. I loved recess. I loved gym. I loved shouting around. I love, shouting and being loud. And I grew up before Title IX. So it's a story about when I went to school in pants for 2 days in a row. It was at a time when in my area, I grew up on the East Coast, and in most of our public schools, all of our public schools, girls were expected to wear skirts and dresses. So one day I just decided to take it on myself, and I was going to wear pants, but how was I going to figure out how to do it? Because at that point in my life, oh my gosh, I hadn't given much thought to how I was going to confront a white male dominated educational environment. And I wasn't even sure how I was going to actually confront the white male dominated environment in my home. I wouldn't even know how to communicate my needs to my mother, who I saw on a regular basis, really in her own way, colluding with white male dominance in our household. Even though she supported her girls to get a good education and be good students, and at that time, it's even wanted us to go to college and expected us to go to college. So I went to school in pants 2 days in a row, and I said to my teachers, I have to wear pants today because I injured my leg and I have to keep my leg warm. And that was my story for the first day. Went to school the next day in pants. And, in order to keep up the charade, I had to limp around and complain to my friends. And, it was a complete prank on my part. It was all fake. And then the second day, I realized I had to go to gym class. And I was like, oh my gosh, oh fuck, what am I going to do? It's gym and I can't participate in gym. I have to lie here with my leg up. So I can actually to this day remember sitting in the corner of this. It was more of an auditorium than a gym at that time in grammar school. And I should say that now in recollection, I think I must have been maybe in third grade. So maybe 9 or 10 years old. And so I remember sitting there on some auditorium chairs with my leg up and rubbing my leg and faking it and looking out at the gym class. And seriously, I was so bummed out. And for me, that's a story about immersion. It's a story about immersion. It's like having to choose between one kind of behavior and another, one kind of dress and another, one kind of consequence and another, the consequence of getting in trouble or being the troublemaker. And I actually felt at that time like I was being rebellious, but now I know, as I've unpacked this story, that that's not what I was exactly experiencing. I knew the situation was very unfair, and I just try to work around. I try to work around in order to not have to confront anyone. I didn't confront anybody. I didn't confront a teacher or a principal with my sense of fairness, that the girls had to wear skirts and dresses, and then we were really limited in our movement of how we could participate in gym class and on the playground. I don't recall speaking out against this unfairness. And in unpacking this story, I realized I don't remember going to any other girlfriends, to tell them how I felt or to ask them to join me one day by wearing pants. I never complained to anyone. It was like a total individual response. And I believe now, as I'm understanding, it was an effort to stay really comfortable, to not be viewed as a troublemaker, to not take any risks, to not give up the privilege I felt and had, to not give up any status or my reputation as a good student, because at that time I was a good student. I was known to be a good girl. I didn't want to give up anything. Well, even though I knew that deeply, the girls were being treated unfairly. And I couldn't imagine a solution that was anything but telling a lie and faking myself through it.
Thanks, Terry. What a great beginning. Thank you. Joanna.
All right, thank you. So the story I would like to share with you from What's Up with White Women is in the defense chapter from a section that's aptly titled Fighting for Crumbs, Sexism versus Racism. The story's about my experience at my favorite racial justice conference, which is the White Privilege Conference. Shout out to the White Privilege Conference, attend the White Privilege Conference. And it's a conference I have been attending and facilitating workshops at for about 15 years. And this story represents a situation that brought about a lot of anger and confusion related to my gender and race. And I'm just really grateful to be able to share this story with you tonight. There's about 3 paragraphs here that I'm going to read to you, and then I will comment after that with my initial impressions of seeing the story after not having looked at it or thought about it for a bit of time. All right, here we go. It actually harkens to the White Privilege Conference and one of my earlier years of going there. There was a panel of Black men, and after that, there was a panel of Black women. The Black women made an assertion that Black men would be better off partnering with Black women because of the way that Black women can understand their experiences with whiteness. And it just pissed me off. I don't know if there's a sexism piece in there, but there may be an internalized sexism piece. I know there's no such thing as reverse racism, but I wonder what sexism was triggered. I was being left out of the equation, and I hadn't ever had people of color on a stage telling me where I didn't belong. It went against my rules of equality. Why are you putting one group down when we are trying to get at racial justice together? Why am I so hated? With the Black women, we are supposed to be on the same page, but now they were saying I'm part of the problem. One of the things that helped soothe me when I came home from the conference was keeping sexism and racism separate. I could watch men of color being sexist, and that would somehow soothe my shame over my racism. Yeah, so you're gonna side with men when they are the problem? I see who you choose. I was like, if WPC, the White Privilege Conference, wants me to keep coming back, they need to stop doing that in-group stuff. There's no room for me. Hui, that's a lot. A lot going on there. So I'm just gonna share 3 initial reactions to that. And the first one is that, not so surprising to me, the first thing that came up was that I wanted to let those of you here tonight know that that experience occurred a decade ago so that I could qualify myself as a good white person. Even though I don't subscribe to the myth of a good white person, yet the idea obviously lives in my mind and body as a way to distance and move myself away from identifying with my racism. First thing that came up. The next thing I want to share with you is that another thing that came up for me was that I had a lot of appreciation for all of my big feelings in that story, because that's part of it. I noticed the anger and the defensiveness and the confusion and just a really genuine desire to figure out what was going on with my interlocking gender and race identities. I clearly was unable to understand the complexities of how race and gender were operating to inform one another. And so, as you heard in the story, I intentionally decided to separate them, which I don't think is uncommon. And in doing so, Ilsa and Tillman actually, in the book and commenting on the story, they explained that what I was doing there, and I agree, is leaning into my white privilege, which daily allows me the opportunity to move in and out of engaging with racial justice work, and to think that my gender, and thus the sisterhood, in this case with the women of color on the panel, should transcend race, and then thus my complicity with racism. Likely pretty classic scenario there. And then finally, the last thing I'll share with you is that I just think my internalized racial superiority, literally, it just had me assuming that the entire conference, and let's note this is a white privileged conference, that the entire conference should actually be organized around me, a white woman, if they wanted me to keep coming back. So there's more actually to unpack in that story. However, those are my kind of the 3 things that rose to the top. And so if there's that much in just this one little story, this book is full of them. So we are all about to have a good time together as you all get copies of the book and we get to read this together and do this work together with the richness that's here. So thank you.
Joanna, thank you so much. I'm right there with you. Thanks so much for that. Katie.
Hi, thanks, Tillman. So I am going to speak to a story that takes place in the section called projection, which is really, as I can best articulate it, it's kind of the next stage of development where we're really, white women are really really coming to kind of a terms with and really understanding like, oh my God, like look at the amount of privilege that I've had and I have, and all of the damage I've done and all the damage I'm probably doing daily. And sorry, I have a dog scratching my couch over here. So it's kind of the next stage after defense. And it really has kind of what Joanna was just saying there, where in this case, things are reversed, where racism is the big deal and sexism is negligible comparatively, right? We're really comparing the our categorization as being, damaged and oppressed. And so here, racism is everything, and showing that you understand racism is everything, so that you can get the support of specifically, I'm sorry about that. We're not used to being ignored over here. Okay, so this is I'm just going to take a few excerpts from a story that I told about a time when I was a supervisor in a mental health program, and I had an African-American woman working for me, and she had shared an experience of racism that she had had out in the community, and my response. What I didn't understand was that she had an expectation beyond me saying, yeah, that really does sound like she is perceiving you based on race and not just based on the work you are doing. And that's really awful. And you are doing a great job working with this family and navigating this situation. And we support you 100%. We support your assessment of what's happening here. And to me, that was that. I didn't know there was an expectation of a next step until later. I knew that there was racism. That wasn't enough to know that there was racism. That sense of, what do you expect from me? I'm still a white person. I wanted some sort of credit for going there, for bringing it up, even though I clearly didn't know what to do with it once we got there. You tell me what it looks like for me to be an ally. Tell me the rules. I did want a very clear rubric of what to do that was right, and I wanted her to tell me what it was. And when she wasn't telling me what it was, I was very frustrated. And I think that example, while hard to see in print, especially on its own, out of context, it was so hard to see in print that I initially told Ilsa and Tillman, like, I don't know how I feel about reading that out loud and then having thoughts about it in a public forum. I'm not sure I'll be able to do that. And initially I talked with this amazing group of women and said, I had lots of great intellectualized theories about why that was the case. Because I'm a therapist, I had great ideas about why so much emotion came up for me and blah, 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 trauma, neural networks, blah, blah, blah. But I think, first of all, my reflection is absolutely it fits very clearly into how Tillman and Ilsa talk about this developmental stage of projection. And what stands out to me is this idea of what Joanna just said, that there is a perfect white person or white woman, that there is a way of doing it right, and that in not being able to do it right, it's better to not do anything at all. That's my visceral experience. And I will say, as a therapist, I recognize that when there's a lot of emotions, like Joanna said, I loved it when you said, I had big feelings. And isn't that great that I had big feelings? Because it means I care. But it also means for a lot of people, when you have really big feelings, then you go, that was a lot. I'm going to sit this one out. And that's part of white privilege, is that you can say, I'm going to sit this one out. And I think that part of why this was so hard to see, and I also thought of saying this was a decade ago, but I think for me, the statement of this is a decade ago is also to say, this was a decade ago and I don't think I'm that much further along. And that's really sad to see and to feel. And that's what I was feeling when I read this by itself and thought, I don't know if I want to own that in front of, I have no idea how many people are here. But there is a big but here, which is that after I told this group of women how I was feeling, and I got a very loving and compassionate, albeit not, I don't know, sycophantic or cloying response, not giving me an out, but giving me an out, I went back and read the book. And in the context of the book, I feel very differently about it. And part of that is because I feel like Terry's stories, Joanna's stories, Mallory's stories, lots of other people's stories in this book, including Ilsa and Tillman, share a lot of their own stories. The idea of making mistakes, but still being someone who is worthy and allowed to still try is very apparent in these pages. So I wanted to read something that speaks to that on page 30. Because this is how I felt after reading the book, which was very different from how I felt when I first read that story. Our model is dynamic and works on a continuum, meaning that movement does not necessarily happen in one direction. White women must be intentional to make regular progress toward balance and integration. When we have less energy, it is more comfortable to return to the habituated tools of a phase such as capitulation, which is an earlier phase, to handle a particular situation. After all, wielding a hammer is easier than figuring out how to operate a power drill. This doesn't mean we stay in those earlier phases for good, but it does mean we need to make the choice every day to figure out how to start the path forward again.
Thank you, Katie. I hope you all can see why we asked this particular group of women to join us. I thank you so much for how open and honest you're being. With that, we'll ask Mallory to join.
Thanks, Tillman. Yeah, this is a developmental model. And I find it really helpful and really effective. And I didn't develop through the stages on a single track. And I think all of us share the characteristic of jumping backwards on a bad day, so that, you know, it's just not a straight shot, right? But in my experience, it was a really crooked path. As a very young person, I ended up with a series of pretty intense experiences. And they're the kind of experiences that help push us from one stage to another. But I was really young, and the experiences were more intense than usual. So I'll read you, the very first experience that I had was captured in the book. So I'm going to read that one to you. There's a defining experience when an African-American woman came to work at my elementary school. And most of the kids in the school had never seen an African-American before, neither had I. Her last name was Clark, the same as mine. And it was an incident where I became the focus of a lot of nasty. I just remember being backed up against a portable with people screaming at me, this ring of faces, all contorted, yelling about how I was related to her because we had the same last name. And I kept saying, I have an E at the end of my name and she doesn't, we're not related. And this is the immersion stage. And I was trying really hard not to be connected to her and not to be taken down with her, right? Trying to be separate from that. And I had several other experiences. Not too long after that, we moved to New Orleans. And before I was 12, I had a basket of experiences that included things like bullets and fire bombs. And my high school was integrated under duress. And two brothers, African-American boys in my church group, had to hide under a culvert in the muddy water in order to evade rural Klansmen who were hunting them with rifles. I mean, you know, and I this was all under 12, and there were lots of other experiences as well. And also experiences of adults taking up that battle in a really amazing, mature, helpful, modeling way. But I was very young. I was under 12 when all of those things happened. And I didn't really have the wherewithal to process what, and make sense of those experiences the way that I can now. I don't know how old I was when I finally figured out that that experience in this book that I read to you was actually a glimpse into what it might be like to be African American sometimes, right? That I just was given this little gift of seeing what that was like. And I don't think, so for that reason, I sort of hopped back and forth through all these stages, up and down quite frequently, I think, in my life, and without ever totally embodying any of them, so that my processing took a really long time. And I would say that, in our group meetings where we were in the focus group, talking about these stages was an opportunity that was really important for me to, again, make another layer of sense. And in fact, reading the book now, I experienced that again, of being able to say, oh yeah, here, I was in this stage last week, and oh, it would have been better for me had I done this stage a little more deeply. So I thank you both for writing this book personally, as well as for, a greater good. Thanks.
Thank you, Mallory. Thanks to all four of you for just opening up and being so honest.
And so we wanted to open up and invite anybody who has questions, to jump in and, and ask us, any one of us, any questions. And so, you all have just spoken. Do you have any, while we're waiting to see if there's audience folks here who have questions, Terry, Joanna, Katie, Mallory, do you have any questions for Tillman and I? I mean, since you've been doing most of the talking about the book that we wrote that you were a part of.
Well, I'm gonna, even though you didn't ask me, I'm also wondering if any of us want to offer, why were you willing to do this with us? I mean, we asked you to tell a lot of stories that were painful, little embarrassing, illustrative of times where we might want to forget them. So we're wondering, could you share a little bit about what motivated you to take this risk?
I'll just say, given my example of my childhood, I didn't reach out to other girls that much, even though I played with them. So I don't miss any opportunity now as an adult white woman to get together with other women and talk about race and whiteness and privilege and unpack whatever is going on with me or with them. It's just become almost like a habit. Like if someone is having a meeting and I want to be there. And so that's what came up for me when you offered the invitation. I don't think I asked very many questions. This is just another opportunity, and maybe I'll be able to be humble and honest. Maybe I'll be able to make some minor steps in understanding how I can undo this long experience of taking privilege for granted and not stepping up and using my voice to bring other white women along.
I can quickly add to that too, that same thing for me, the opportunity to dig in to something that has so much complexity with regard to a privileged identity and a marginalized identity, because that's just tricky regardless of the identities. And And something that just happened this weekend was I had attended a workshop that Ilsa and Tilman had facilitated at a conference and on this topic. And so I just need to be doing this for likely ever, trying to understand the complexity here between these two identities and all the insidious ways that they work together. And it's just really difficult work. And I found myself at the end of their workshop when we were debriefing, I was like, so seriously, like, what is the answer? and the whole point of this work is there isn't an answer. There's likely many ways that we can move forward with this work. And I just have to constantly remind myself of that. And so I'm just grateful for the opportunity, whether it's reading your book or being in a workshop or participating in a focus group, to just dig in and learn to sit with this complexity.
Thank you.
We do have a couple of questions that have come in from the audience now. Amber asked if we could speak a little bit about the model that's being referred to. Tillman, do you want to field that one? Because the next one's directly related to the model.
Sure. So thanks. You know, it's these stories, as I said before, are illustrative of a model that we created with 6 stages. And the first stage starts, and I won't go through all of them, but I'll start with the first stage, and it's called Immersion. And this is where both our internalized sexism and our internalized white superiority are in full regalia. So it's when we are defensive, when we're racist, when we are kind of buying into the patriarchal model that we've all been born into, and we act out accordingly. And the stories are there for everyone to see all the different ways that that could look. By the way, all of us, Ilsa and myself especially, see ourselves in all of these phases. So many of our stories are in the first phases, and not just when we think we've arrived towards the other end of the spectrum. We go along, so there's immersion, there's capitulation, there's defense, and then there's projection. And there's a phase after that called balance, where we're actually using skills that we've learned, that we've adopted, that we've adapted, and we're being very intentional and deliberate in terms of understanding how internalized sexism and how our racism and internalized superiority are acting out. And we're trying to counter that with being active racial justice practitioners. And integration is our final phase. And this is the phase where, think about a time where you just had a moment of like such clarity and knowledge, where your values and your actions were aligned, and you were able to navigate a situation, and then poof, it's gone. That's our final phase. And it's where we all wish we could live all the time. But I personally am lucky if I get to see it once a year. So that's just a very quick synopsis of what the model is about.
Thanks, Tillman. We've got a couple, I'm seeing names probably pop up that are familiar. Thanks y'all for being here. Elaine says for the panelists, and we'll go to Katie and Mallory, one or both of you, to respond to this. With your knowledge now of the developmental model, how do you stop yourselves to recognize what stage you're in a given moment? What is the ability you have to have those aha moments?
Well, I can say, go ahead. No, okay. I can say that my ability to see myself depends on how much sleep I had the night before, how many other bad experiences I've had in, the last couple of days. What's different now is that I slow down. I'm not just racing through my uncomfortable experiences. I'm slowing way down and taking a deep breath and trying to come back into my body and trying to be curious, trying to be with the other person that I'm with. I mean, it's often a reach, but I can do it more now than I used to be able to. Katie?
Yeah, I would say, and I'm really, I think that, part of what is notable in some of the earlier stages, like defense and capitulation and immersion, is that part of that stage in my understanding of it is there is low insight in that moment. And so some of that is either taking a breath or listening to, for me, again, as a therapist, listening to my body. If I notice kind of alarms going off, anxiety going off, that tells me something is wrong inside. But I think when it comes to projection, and one of the things I just want to throw out there is there's one sentence I forgot to say that I have to say, because I think it really spoke to a lot of my experience, which is one of the things they say at the end of that projection chapter, which is, again, that phase of like, racism is everything, and I alone have to change it. It is on me, despite the millennia that other people have been working on this, or maybe not millennia. And one of the things they say about that stage is we may not be able to imagine another way of being in the work. And I think that's really, to me, critical, is to recognize, oh, there is another way beyond this perfectionistic. So for me, it's like recognizing in any interaction, is this more about what you're going to think about me, or is this really what feels right within me internally? Based on relationship, based on me tuning into what happens after what I said, and what happens then, being in one of the things they talk about, this awareness in the moment, and just being super, super present as I can. Once I get into my head, that tells me that there's a reason I'm in my head, and it's because something's wrong in here. So I would just say that that's for me, and I'm still pretty early in my journey.
Thanks, Katie. We have a wonderful question from a wonderful person that is important to me especially. Lou Rochelle asks, I'd like to know at what stage a white woman was in when I had an experience with her 40 years ago. We were both first grade teachers, and she pretended she wanted to see my children's standardized test scores just out of curiosity and not to do anything with them. When she discovered that my children had scored well on the test, she went immediately to the principal to tell him that he should take some kids out of my class and out of her class and give them to me, because her children were not as smart as the children in my class, and she needed a smaller class size. It never occurred to her that I was actually teaching the children as the explanation for how they fared so well on the test. At which stage of your model would you place her betrayal, and why? Oh, Lou Rochelle, I love you for this question. Well, okay, I'll say it first, and I'm pretty sure we're all pretty clear. This woman is in immersion. And I would love to say I never did anything like this, but as a former teacher, I'm sure I did things equally as harmful and equally as racist. And the one thing that Ilsa and I heard a lot, especially from students of color and colleagues of color, was when we did things like this, how not only was it racist, but we did it while we smiled, as if we were smiling, you wouldn't actually hear what we were saying because we're such good people. We're so nice. We're not being racist. We're just, trying to figure things out. So it's really important to look beyond the actual physical mannerisms that we have and understand how insidious an action like this was and how deeply in immersion she was. Anyone else want to add to that, Ilse, or anyone?
Hi, Lou Rochelle. For me, I also caution, so I think that she demonstrated behaviors and patterns that we commonly see in the immersion phase, where internalized white superiority is rampant and unquestioned, and internalized sexism in going to the man in charge who makes the decisions is also rampant and unquestioned. It might be active, but likely if you were to question or confront her around it, it would be a passive aggressive response. Oh, no, just like the way that she approached you was in a passive aggressive manner. Can I just curious, I just kind of, oh no, I'm a nice person, right? Because so much of our privilege comes from the assumption of innocence that we as white women have. That said, I hesitate to use the model as a label for someone, in as much as it then becomes a reason to dismiss somebody or say, okay, so that person is here. So in that moment, that's the stage that we would name for that particular incidence. I've had moments of immersion yesterday, and I wouldn't want people to believe that that's all of who I am. And so I think that that's really important for us to keep in mind, because with developmental models, we can be very quick to want to then put ourselves and other people into buckets, as if that then explains all of who that person is. And I actually think that that can get in the way of us, particularly white women in this work who want to show up as accomplices or, in solidarity with you to fight the racism that you're experiencing, and are going to need to make the connections with white women like this one that did that harmful, painful thing to you. So there's any other final comments, thoughts as we close out tonight? So see, now we're going to get a whole bunch of questions at the last minute. Oh, all right. So I will read this one because it comes from my awesome business partner, Dr. Caprice Hollins. Hey, Caprice. Thank you all for your vulnerability. Many people of color are tired of teaching white people. One of my triggers is when white people ask me, what can I do, particularly when I've just shared what they can do? What have you learned in your journey about what white women can do? Question is for any of the panelists. So.
I will say what I know I need to do, and that is to seek out and find other white women who are doing this self-examination, who have walked in my shoes, or meaning, to use this model, are at least as far, or maybe have gone past the developmental stage I'm really wrestling with. So I know that there is another side of the canyon. They use that metaphor is in the book, this idea of jumping to the other side of the canyon, and it really does can feel impossible. And just like the projection example that I shared, it can't rest on the shoulders of people of color to tell me what's up with me and what I need to do differently. And so I think for me, it's really invaluable to have conversations like this.
Joanna has a Beyond the Book Club group that's getting together. That's not a book club discussion, but is a chance for white people to talk about what we can do beyond the book club. Joanna, do you want to share a little bit about that as another opportunity for people to engage?
Yeah, thanks, Ilsa. You can find, there's 3 different groups that are going to be starting this fall, and then I'll be doing the same thing again this winter. And they are book groups for people to gather together in community with other white folks to understand what is whiteness, how does whiteness operate, how do we decenter our whiteness for the sake of developing an anti-racist identity and being able to be co-conspirators in the movement. So I initially thought of it as being a beginning place. And what I've realized by the folks who have participated in the groups is that it's for all of us all of the time, just in the same way the authors here tonight shared that their own model, we're all moving all around in it. So yeah, thanks for that opportunity, Ilsa.
And go ahead, Terry.
Just very briefly, something that I know that I want to do and try to do, and have been approaching this, even though I'm and even though I'm in book groups and I'm a student of this work, I constantly return to the notion that this is my life. This is not work. This is really how I want to live my life. It's how I want to engage with people in my community, in my family. I want to have those reflective times with myself. I want to, and it's very important that I see that this is my life in order for me to change. It's not a project. It's not a degree. It's my life.
Thanks, Terry. And I would love to just read one more thing from the book in answer to this, and as we close tonight. I bookmarked a spot in the book for the "what can we do, what can I do" question. We have a whole chapter on it, but one that I pulled out is empathize. This includes connecting with people of color by listening and believing their stories. We often hear white allies say, "I will never know what it's like to be a person of color." While this statement is true, it does not mean we shouldn't do our darndest to try to understand, and especially to see how we've been taught not to see people of color as fully human, and how that has dehumanized us. We also need to practice empathy with other white people. Hurt people will lash out and hurt others. Systemic racism and sexism hurt everyone, even as we may be receiving the benefits of white privilege. When we recognize this, it is easier to make empathic connections with other white people who we might otherwise want to dismiss or distance ourselves from. If we as white people cannot talk with other white people who we might otherwise want to dismiss, cannot talk with other white people about our racist assumptions, about whether intentional or not, then there's no way we will be able to change our institutions. If we as white people do not help other white people to see the ways we can work together to address institutional racism, we leave the full weight of that work on the shoulders of people of color. So thank you all for coming and for engaging. Tillman, anything you want to say as we wrap up here? Anybody else?
Thank you to all of our panelists or co-conspirators, to the audience, to Allie for being such a great steward to us. And thank you for being in this conversation with us. We hope for us, it's been life-changing. So thank you for letting us share.
All right, I am back. So it is about time for us to call this a night, but I'm just going to take a last minute to say a huge, huge thank you to all of you for being here and for sharing these stories with us. Audience members, thank you, of course, for tuning in. We are so, so happy to have you here. For anyone who would like to get your hands on copies of What's Up with White Women, go ahead and follow the link in chat. It'll just be a little bit of scrolling up to find it. Let us know what you thought of this event in person or on any of our social media. We always love to hear from you. Speakers, one more huge thank you for being here and for sharing this work that you're doing with us. It has been such a pleasure. And I think that at this point, it is time for us to bid you adieu. So, shall we let the awkward waving commence?
Thanks, Allie.
Thanks
Thanks
to
everyone.
everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
night.